guys, welcome back. So today we are doing some trial runs for our Thanksgiving cooking. I'm gonna try to do homemade rolls because the ones we usually buy are gluten filled. So I'm trying to do some einkorn rolls. I am gonna do a traditional yeast roll, so I'm not gonna do sourdough, and we're gonna see how that turns out. I'm modifying the recipe I found a little bit, but I'll let you guys know how it goes. We'll see how they turn out. And I'm also practicing a dessert. I'm doing a sourdough cobbler out of apples. So we're gonna try those two things out on this video. Okay, so the first thing I have to do is get the tap water really hot. So we're gonna dissolve the yeast in a teaspoon of sugar and let that be, it has to sit a little while. So I'm gonna get that going first so that the yeast has a chance to start to develop some. It's in really hot tap water, so. All right, so half a cup. And then I'm going to do a tablespoon of the yeast. Mixed with a teaspoon of sugar. So the sugar just kind of gets the yeast going. It gets it activating, so to speak. So I'm just going to stir that up a little. And the last time I did this with my bread, it worked really better to let the yeast sit a little bit. So I'm going to get that going and let it start doing its thing. Some yeast are instant and some yeast has to be activated. And the yeast that I'm using has to activate a little bit before it really gets ready to use. So we're going to let that sit. It's activating. Put it over here out of the way so I don't spill it. Now, the next step is we're going to melt a stick of butter. Dick's involved. My dog's like all up over here thinking he's helping us here. Alright, so we're going to do a stick of butter. We do a cup of milk. And then a fourth a cup of sugar. So we're just going to let that all kind of dissolve together. Now that's a turbinado sugar, just not been as processed as regular white sugar. The recipe actually called for honey. We have not liked the breads and things that I've made using honey. So I just decided to go ahead and skip that and go straight to doing just the regular sugar. That way, I'm pretty sure we're gonna like these. So the recipe says to let this scald. I honestly don't know what that means. I'm assuming that means let everything melt together. I know milk will actually get thick sometimes when you cook it, and I'm assuming that's what it means. So we're going to let that do its thing here. Okay, now in my mixing bowl, I'm going to take 2 eggs, break those in. And to that, I'm going to add a cup and a half of flour. And then I will add in the yeast mixture. Alright, so a cup and a half of flour goes into this. I'm trying to be really precise with the measurements since this is the first time I've done this recipe. I don't know how finicky it is. So a cup and a half of the flour. And then let's see, I'm trying to think. I probably want the dough hook. Okay, so I was figuring out kind of which attachment I wanted to use. I decided not to do the dough hook. I'm going to do just my mixing attachment because everything just has to get incorporated, and then I'm going to knead it by hand. I'm not a big fan of this for kneading, so. And you can see that it's got this skim on the top, and the mixture's cool even though my pan's still really hot. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that in. Oh, it's still hot. Well, that may not be good. We'll see. So I'm just going to get that incorporated. And then this yeast is nut, and that's going in after I get this mixed. So the yeast is active, very active. Alright, so I'm going to stop that. And I'm going to add the yeast. And then I mix again. So you're incorporating it into the mixture that you started with. Now, as this is getting mixed, I'm going to start measuring out. This is one of those recipes that kind of drives me crazy because I want you to tell me exactly how to do it. But there's some science behind it. I have to just add the flour until it reaches kind of a smooth, satiny consistency. And it says about 3 to 4 cups. Now there's 3. Let's let that really get going. It's weighing down the mixer a little bit, so. It says a satiny consistency. I don't really know what that means. I'm gonna add just a little more. So that was about 3.5 cups of flour. Now, I'm gonna get a surface over here. I get to use my pastry sheet. I'm so excited. So I forgot to add the salt, so I'm gonna add that in, and it is a teaspoon and a half. So I'm gonna let that mix just a little, and then I'll be ready to turn it out and start kneading. So I have this really cool pastry sheet, because as you know, my counters are really grooved and they're wood, and it's really hard to roll out and knead bread or do stuff on it. So I have this, I bought this pastry thing. It's so cool. I got this from Pampered Chef. So I'm just going to flour the surface, and we're supposed to knead this for like 8 minutes. So okay, so let me make a little correction. So I was just going to mix it, and that did not work. So you definitely do need to use your dough hook that goes with your mixer, and that way you can get the dough ball started. I had a big mess, so don't do that. Don't do what I said earlier. Make sure you do the dough hook. So I'm supposed to knead this for 8 minutes, and I've already did a little kneading with the dough hook. I don't know, you guys. I'm just going to be honest with you. I've never made rolls in my whole life. So I don't really know how they're supposed to be. The dough has come together. The thing about the ancient grains is if you overwork them, they become real stiff and difficult to deal with. And plus, that's going to make your bread tough. So I have found in my sourdough making the bread, if I work it less, it's better. Okay, so here's what I've got. I've got a nice dough ball. So I'm supposed to put this in a greased bowl. So I'm going to do that. And it just has to sit and rise for 45 minutes. And then we divide it into the rolls and let it rise again. So we're going to get this into a bowl and let it rise. And we'll be back when we get ready to make the rolls. Okay, so now that we've got the rolls on, they're doing their thing for 45 minutes. I'm going to start the next recipe, which is the apple cobbler. Now it is a sourdough based topping, and that's what I'm going to make now. Now I'm just going to say all of these recipes are a little complicated, so I'm just doing the best I can. This is the first time I've not tried them off camera, so you're seeing the real live version of what you have to go through to kind of perfect some of these. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have to measure my dry ingredients. So I do 1.5 cups of the flour, a pinch of salt. So I'm just going to do just a little salt. Alright, so 2 tablespoons of sugar. I will point out that this called for brown sugar, but I didn't catch that. Turbinado's dark. It's fine. We're going with it. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of take a spoon and mix this together. Kind of incorporate everything together. So you take your butter, and I've cut it into pieces, and I'm just going to drop it in there, and then I take my pastry cutter and I cut the butter in until it makes kind of a coarse meal consistency, and then this will be ready. So about 1/2 cup of butter goes into your dry mixture, And this thing is awesome. And you're just kind of picking up the butter, and it breaks it and mixes it in with the flour somehow. It's really neat how it does. Butter, you just want to make sure you cut all the butter pieces so that there's nothing large left. Kind of a textured, you can kind of see how that looks. Now that's ready just to wait. Now I'll do my wet ingredients. A half a cup of my starter, and I fed my starter earlier today, so this is a fed starter. I'm just going to measure that out. I have the neatest wooden spoon that I also got from Pampered Chef that kind of has a tip, and it's great for getting into these metal measuring spoons and kind of digging out the sticky. This stuff is sticky like glue. If you guys have ever used starter or tried to bake bread, I mean, it's like glue. So that little spoon really helps. Now to that, I'm going to add a half a cup of milk. I'm doing 2/4 cups. That'll be roughly a half a cup. Now I'm just going to mix that together, and then that's going to go into my wet ingredients. No, the wet ingredients go into the dry ingredients. Sorry, I said that backwards. I'm just kind of thinning out the starter a little bit with some milk. Now let me double check, make sure. I'm going to combine these together. So first I'm going to take a big spoon and just kind of get my dry ingredients all together. Almost make that little well. You've seen people do that when they make pasta. Now I'm just going to start by stirring this and getting it incorporated together. Now I'm just going to kind of take my hands and just kind of work it around the edges to gather up any extra dry flour. That's just going to help it come together better. And it's a pretty wet mixture, but it does come together into a little dough ball. That's good. And it just to kind of get it kneaded together. So now what I'm going to do is I've got a bowl ready that is greased, and this has to just rise. So we let this rise for about 1.5 hours, and while that's rising, we can be working on the filling. To me, this is a little rustic, but a cobbler is a rustic type dessert. It's not a, I don't know, it's not like a pie that has to be really smooth and pretty. It's kind of a more rustic look. So I'm not concerned about that. I think it's going to be fine. So I'm going to take a minute and get cleaned up here a little bit, and then we'll come back and start the filling part of our cobbler. So I'm ready now to start the filling process, and that requires 8 apples. So we did a combination of Fuji, which I did 3, and then Granny Smith. So Granny Smith is a really good cooking apple. They are tart. So we are going to be adding sugar to this recipe, obviously, so that's going to help that out a little bit. But they're just a really good sturdy apple, so they'll kind of keep a good texture for something like this. So I'm going to peel these and slice them, and then we're going to cook them down in a skillet. Okay, so I have the apples cut and sliced. Now I'm going to zest a lemon. And remember my tip about lemons, if you're going to need the zest, you always want to buy organic because you're actually eating the peel. I try to buy the organic lemons anyway. I just think that's probably a safe practice because I never know when I'm going to want to use the zest. But for sure, if you know you're going to be using the zest, you should get the organic because I'm actually taking the outside peeling off of this lemon to use in this recipe. So we're mixing that, and we're doing the zest on top of the apples, and then I'm going to squeeze the lemon over it. I try to be real careful, just kind of to barely get the skin, and that way you don't get that bitterness. The white part is kind of bitter, so if you get too deep in that, then it's not as good. I love using the zest of lemon and lime. It just adds a brightness to a dish, so kind of cool. All right, now I'm just going to cut this in half. I'm going to squeeze upside down so I don't get any seeds. And then we just kind of toss that. And then we're going to add nutmeg. So this calls for grated nutmeg. I don't have fresh nutmeg. So I'm just going to do about a half a teaspoon of just some that I have in the pantry. And I'm just going to kind of coat the apples with that. Now I love nutmeg. It's one of the things I put in my coffee. I do that in cinnamon every morning. So I like the taste of nutmeg. And I'm sure fresh grated, I've never had fresh grated nutmeg, but I'm sure it's good. I don't even know if we can get that here where we live. I've never looked for it, but anyway. I usually just typically do the dried spice version of that. So usually it just said grated nutmeg, so it didn't give a specific measurement. But if you're doing a dried instead of a fresh, it's usually half the amount. You double it if you're using fresh. So
will you repeat that? Sorry, I was trying to avoid the dog and it wasn't even.
So typically in recipes, if you have fresh herbs, you're using double the amount. So you would half it if you had dry, because dried is more concentrated where it's been dried down. All right, so now I'm just going to lightly spray my skillet, and I'm going to melt a half a stick of butter on probably somewhere between medium and low heat. And to that I'm going to add 1/4 cup of sugar. So the good thing about this recipe is it's not a ton of sugar and sweet, which I'm really trying to be careful with. And of course the holidays bring on all kinds of rich, decadent desserts. We typically do a pumpkin pie cheesecake. Well, my daughter is really trying to be strict with herself on the non-dairy, like cheese and things like that. She doesn't have as much trouble with butter. Butter seems to be one of those things that even lactose intolerant people tolerate better. But like cheeses and milks, we're really trying to be careful with. So we're not going to do the pumpkin pie cheesecake, obviously, because it has cream cheese in it. Now, this recipe is very lightly sweetened. So the apples are going to bring some natural sweetness, and then it's got this 1/4 cup of sugar, and that's it. So, of course, we haven't tasted it, but I'm assuming it's going to be really good, but not as sweet, which is going to help me out in that dessert world. So if you're wanting to be a little more healthy for the holidays, this is the kind of desserts to look for, because your crust is fermented. Sourdough is fermented, so that adds you some healthy bacteria. We're just going to kind of get this going together, and then I add the apples in. So it's kind of like just cooking down apples. I don't know if you guys ever do that. We used to do that all the time when I was a kid, and have them just as a side dish. Okay, so we're going to just let these cook down until they get really soft, and the butter and the sugar together will just kind of make a thick caramelly type sauce. So that'll take a little bit. So in the meantime, we're going to let this do its thing, and my timer just went off to do the rolls, to roll out the dough. So I'm going to get that over here on the other side, and we'll see how that looks. I'm going to spray my pan. This is just like an average cake pan. I use Pyrex, but it's just that size. I'm going to spray it really good. And now I'm just going to take this dough and roll it. It says into golf ball size dough balls. Then this will rise again. So I'm going to try to make them very even. And I'm just going to put them in there close together, because you know how you make dinner rolls and they're all touching. So here's what I have. I have about 20, it made about 20 rolls, and I probably could have rolled them a little smaller. I just wanted to get a pan full, so you could probably divide some of these. They're supposed to be golf ball size. So anyway, now I let them rise again, so I'm just going to cover them and place them back on the back of my stove where it's warm, and they'll rise again, and then they'll be ready to bake. I'm going to cover these with a tea towel, I think. Okay, so now we're back to the apples. They're really starting to cook down. You can see there's some juice that's cooked out, and that's kind of what you're wanting to happen. The apples are letting go of some of their juice, and the sauce is kind of starting to form there in the bottom of the skillet. So we're just gonna let these continue to cook down while that dough rises. Right now we're back at a state where there's not much going on, so everything's gotta rise. The dough for this, it's gotta do an hour and a half. So it's got at least another good hour and 10 minutes to go. So I'm just gonna let these continue to cook down, and then we'll be back in a little bit to show you what's what. So the rolls have risen another 45 minutes, and they have fluffed up even more. So they're ready to go in the oven on 350 and bake for about 30 minutes. So once the rolls are finished, I'll be ready to put together the cobbler, and it'll go in the oven. So it's going to be, this actually worked out pretty well timing wise. So just so if you're trying to time your stuff for Thanksgiving cooking, this worked out pretty good together. So okay, so I'm just flouring my pastry sheet a little bit. I'm going to turn out my dough and roll it out. The topping for the cobbler is finished, and it did cook down like apple pie filling, which is really cool. So I'm going to just lightly spray the bottom of my baking dish, and then I'm going to add the apples. So you can see they got really thick, kind of, oh, that's hot. Kind of like the apple pie filling you buy in a can, but this is no preservatives whatsoever. I made this up myself. So I'm just going to, or cook this up myself, I should say. So I'm just going to spread that across the bottom. So I'm just going to roll this out. It is still a really moist dough, so I'm not sure how much rolling I'm going to do. Then I'm going to take this and cover the top of this, and it'll go into the 375-degree oven for about 45 minutes. Okay guys, here it comes. That looks really good. I think it's done. We'll check and see. So this is the apple cobbler. A very rustic looking dessert, which I think is really cool for Thanksgiving. I think it's great. Because we were just talking earlier about how, you know, it seems like now people have such an expectation of everything being so fancy, when in reality, especially back in the early times, this is exactly what it would have been like, very rustic. I think that's kind of cool. So the rolls turned out delicious. Very light and fluffy. A little denser than a traditional roll, but we've already discussed that many times about the flour, and it's just not going to be the same. These are a typical yeast roll recipe. There's no sourdough about this, so I didn't end up using any sourdough in the rolls. I think they turned out really good. Now the cobbler is a sourdough topping. I do want to emphasize that I made a huge error in trying to use the mixing part of my stand mixer. I used the mixer instead of the dough hook. So don't do that, because it made a big huge mess. It took me forever to get the bowl clean because it got all, the dough was all sticky. The dough hook actually will mix it and cause it to turn loose from the sides, which is what you need it to do in order to take it out and eat it. So just do not do it. Don't do it. So let's see how the roll turned out as far as taste goes actually. Really good. Really tasty. So anyway, it has a nice crust, and it's really crunchy. I love that. I love that. So the rolls turned out really good. I'm really pleased with those, even though they were a hot mess and they were very difficult because it was my first time. I don't think I'll have any trouble next time because I know exactly what to do to rectify the mistake I made. So it'll be fine. Look at that. Nice and hot and steamy. And I do think the dough is done. That's going to burn my mouth. I just want y'all to know. We're going to give it a taste. It's really tasty. Not too sweet. Like I said, I really have searched for desserts that are not using a ton of sugar and overly sweet. And for my daughter, we were looking for something that didn't have a huge dairy component, because many desserts do. And I think this fits the bill. Now this is actually supposed to be topped with a maple cream, like a whipped cream with maple syrup. So I don't have those ingredients tonight, but what we'll do, because of Lindsay's dairy intolerance, is they make a coconut whipped cream, and we'll try to pick some of that up to mix in with some maple syrup, and it would be a great addition. You could also do ice cream, would be really good with this if you were able to do, and they have tons of dairy-free options and different options in that. So that would also be a good alternative, just to give it a little extra something if you were wanting that. But I think all in all, the recipes turned out great. I would recommend them. Of course, the first time you make anything, it's hard, and there's a little bit of a learning curve, but I believe I'll be ready to get these going really well for our Thanksgiving Day celebration. So I hope you enjoyed these and are not afraid to kind of step outside your comfort zone and try something new this Thanksgiving that will help you also reach your lifestyle and diet goals. So I hope that you all will have a wonderful Thanksgiving Day and are able to spend some time with your family. I know things are a little iffy in that area this year, and I hope that everyone out there gets to at least talk to their family. So like and subscribe, that really helps the channel, and see you later.